Hello, everyone. I'm Jenny Blake, but I'm actually going to go last for the introductions. Chris, would you like to start us off with the title and a brief introduction to yourself?
Yes, so we're presenting Moving Beyond Discussion, Putting Open Philosophies into Practice. I'm Chris Millson, e-learning manager for the University of Manchester Library. And I will be talking about what the unit is that we're talking about and some of the pedagogical and technological decisions which have led to it looking the way it does.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah and I am going to be talking about my new perspective into teaching this course because I've been with the course for a couple of years now. And I'm a learning developer in the library, so in teaching, learning and students as well. So same theme as Chris.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm Jenny Blake. I am Associate Director for Teaching, Learning and Student Success, which is a very long title. That just means I look after all of the teaching that we put on within the library, including our credit-bearing units, which this talk is about. In addition to that, just for a brief contextual overview, Manchester is one of the larger, I think we enjoy calling ourselves the largest in some cases, depending on your metrics, single-site universities in the UK. We have just over 45,000 students, around 12,000 staff. So it's an enormous institution, and there's always a lot going on. And this particular module has been around in our postgraduate certificate in higher education since that program started. And we'll go into more detail about that later. I'm also going to speak about open education in a library context, why it makes sense that a library delivers this kind of module on this kind of topic. I'm going to touch on generative AI because we really have to. And then Chris and I are going to team up and talk about a checklist around supporting development of open practice. So that's our introductory bit. And now I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Thank you. So open knowledge in higher education, which we shall heretofore refer to as OKHE to save 7 syllables, is an open course on openness. So that's what we mean by putting open philosophies into practice. Anyone can access it, so it centers around an online publication about openness, open education, open practice, and anyone can access it freely. It's also openly licensed, so anyone can reuse core parts of it freely. But today we're going to be talking about some of the less obvious ways in which we've made it open and why. So alongside being an open publication, there are also some closed aspects because there's no such thing as 100% open, we believe. So it also runs through the university's postgraduate certificate in higher education, and PG Cert participants can also receive degree credit for it, access one-to-one support and feedback. But we've tried to make it as open as we can. So on the next slide, I will talk a little bit about how we set this up. So it's a publication, you might call it an online magazine about openness. And when we were developing it, we thought about how we wanted the publication to be open. Okay, so Jenny will talk later about avoiding open washing, but we wanted to avoid falling into that trap ourselves of saying, we'll just make it open and then not really thinking about it. We had a lot of discussions where we weren't afraid to call each other out and say, okay, but what do we mean by this? So one thing that we wanted to do was to make the course materials community created and owned by the individuals who created them. So one thing we talked about initially was having a wiki kind of setup. But we realized that a wiki has something whereby there is only one page per topic, and it tries to capture, at least in the Wikipedia model, something neutral, and each topic aims to become the best page on that topic. That's not what we wanted. We wanted subjectivity. We wanted to capture many different voices, many different viewpoints on openness. So this model, which is outlined in a lot more detail on the accompanying blog post, kind of shows some of the different things we considered. There are pros and cons to all of them. But on our next slide, we look at kind of what led us to our choice. So the first kind of pedagogical decision we have here is that openness would not exist. Open practice would not exist without practice, and open practice exists in response to society, to the world. And so if we're talking about openness while not doing openness and while not giving our participants opportunities to do openness, then we thought that it would be missing something. So that's what led us to the kind of online community publication. This second quote from Mahabali about subjectivity really encapsulates what we thought about when we moved away from a wiki idea towards what we call a choral publication. And that kind of sums up the ownership model. But there was one little tweak that we wanted to make, which is open practice is mostly practiced by humans, and humans are individuals, and we wanted to give those individuals rights over their work and the power to choose how their work was licensed, just as they would have in the real world. So it's a collaborative effort, but if participants want to edit or delete their assessed work after the course is finished, then they're free to do so, which creates a lot of issues for assessment, as you might imagine. And those are issues which we've had to build structures around, which did not exist in our learning management system. But we think it was worth building those structures in order to genuinely practice openness in the open. So next slide, please, Jenny. Thank you. So in the blog post, we go into a bit more detail about all of these choices. Just want to say, we don't believe we've made the correct choices. We believe we've made the correct choices for us and for what we are delivering and for our philosophies. But there is nothing wrong with going any other way. What we'll present later in this session is our kind of heuristic for coming up with your own choices and kind of appraising them if you're considering using openness in a context like this. So as I mentioned, there's loads of technological implications. For example, asking people to blog publicly, we have to think about the implications of that, and it's very different from submitting a Word document into a learning management system. There are pros and cons, so we had to think about pseudonyms. We had to cover a lot of the practicalities that come along with that, and a lot more in-house support. But as I've said, we think it's the right thing to do, but we don't want to pretend like it's a perfect option which makes everything better in every way, because that would be open washing and that would lead us to overlook practicalities and risks. So now over to Sarah, who's going to tell a bit more about how it happened in reality.
Thanks, Chris. So I've tried to categorize sort of the things that I've thought about and that we've talked about over the past couple of years while I've been teaching on the course. And so I just wanted to sort of raise a few things that might need to be considered, and then and some things as well, just to sort of explain how things have gone based on our decisions. So the hybrid delivery choice has been a challenge. So, you know, it does allow people to choose how they attend and where. We have to book a physical room and make an online space as well. And the physical room doesn't always have the technology or the capability to support hybrid delivery, even if it says it does. I feel like some of the rooms kind of say that they do, and that we've noticed that some spaces are better than others. And then also, we've had it that we've practiced in the space, turned up the next day to teach, and it doesn't work. So we've had to be really careful about preparing how we can react to all different sorts of potential outcomes when it comes to the tech and the space. We also don't know if people are going to turn up to the room or be online. So we have one of us online at all times, one of us in the room at all times, and then the third person kind of is wherever is needed. But that's difficult too, because the teaching requirements are different. So this year I was teaching online, whereas last year I was in person. And this year I was sat with my laptop on my knee in a room next door to where we were teaching in person. And I didn't have two screens. I couldn't swap easily between windows. So when it came to my bit, it was quite awkward, but I chose to do that because it meant that I was available. And I could come into the room if everybody turned up in person. So it's just sort of balancing those different things and thinking, right, what do we want to prioritize, and let's see how it goes. The rapport between everybody can be quite difficult to, well, not difficult, but I'd say that it's more considerations, because when you don't know who's going to turn up and you don't know where they're going to be, you've got to make sure that people can talk and they can work together. So that's something to think about. And the curriculum, the choices that we make facilitate that conversation. So we know open can be categorized in lots of different ways. We know that from today, but we know that from everything that we might have come across. We have three synchronous opportunities, three opportunities to talk to our participants. So we split our topics into the philosophical, the practical, and the personal. We ask what is open in the first session, then we move on to the possibilities and pitfalls, and then we end up with the intersections with open. So we're not trying to herd them into any sort of specific thinking of open, but we do want to introduce things like open practice, open research within those topics. And it works quite nicely. It supports that ability to be subjective and like follow the paths they want, but actually having a bit of structure. So the activities also support this as well. So we try where we can to put reflective activities. A lot of them are anonymous, so we don't ask people to share details. It helps people be more candid. We've had that feedback. But like we also want to widen perspectives by making sure that people can talk to people even if they're not in the same space. So we use the blog posts as the learning materials throughout the sessions for that. And we're very transparent about where we find activities. One of the welcome activities, the Ode to the Other Hand, for example, it's not ours, but we thought it'd be really useful to include it because we can. It puts everybody in the beginner space. We ask participants how they feel about open before they've even taught them anything. You know, we just want to know where they are, and we ask them to draw or write about it with their hand that they don't normally do it with. And the feedback we've got from that's been really kind of. It feels like it puts everybody sort of in the beginner mindset. So that's been lovely to see. And then when we come to assessment, we're not very strict on what we want. We have marking criteria that are there to help people feel like it's achievable. We have a default, so we have a default blog post, but participants can ask us if they want to submit in a different way, and we're very happy to consider it as long as it's appropriate and justifiable. And we've noticed that the learning outcomes, people seem to be reaching them and hitting the criteria when topics are organised in the way that we've sort of thought that we should, and with the assessment being the way it is. So it's been really useful for that. I also think that when we ask participants to focus on their particular context, it kind of puts a bit of a buffer against using overuse of Gen AI in terms of writing, because we know that is happening, or it can be happening, but we focus on whether and why to use AI rather than how and what. And so we embed those ideas of like critical AI use and critical thinking around ownership and everything within the course. So I'm going to very briefly give you an opportunity now to become a live participant. We only have a minute for this, but I think it could be really useful to sort of see an example in real time of like how this works. So we've got the link in the chat, but we're asking, how can we banish openness from an institution? Why are we asking this? Because sometimes it's really useful to, instead of ask the question you want an answer to just completely subvert it and just see what happens and see what comes out of that. So we ask it in this way, and we create an online thread so that people can see everybody's answers. It's that choral explanations again. It's like everybody is contributing to what openness, how to get rid of openness. So if you want to scan the QR code or click on the link, I can see on my other screen, I can see the activity. If you are able to even just put one or two things in just in the next 30 seconds, that would be fantastic. And we could see them coming up. I think we might be able to share it on screen as well to see them coming up. Bear with me a sec.
So I was getting a warning that stopping sharing will end it for everyone. So if people have it open, just because I don't have faith in the tech gremlins today, you can see it. So we've got at the top, defund things which are not profitable, make lecture notes, keep them private, charge for accessing any little information, And in this case, the we can be institutional, it can be personal, it can be structural to your context. We're quite broad, as Sarah was saying, in our initial approaches to these conversations.
Yeah, this is anonymous as well. You know, it's just allowing that freedom of exploring every opportunity to follow your thoughts. So we're not like gatekeeping conversations. We've put you into the actual activity that they used this year, so you can see everybody's responses then, and you can add your own. This is just the first section as well. So this is it's like a 3-step activity. But we'll come back later. You know, we will, if you go to the blog posts and the media, you'll be able to find anything you need if you want to revisit this. That's the beauty of the asynchronous sort of element to it, that there's no need to do this now, but we wanted to share it here. I think we're probably coming to the end of my little bit now, so I'll let Jennie take over. But thank you.
Thanks, Sarah and Chris. So, and hi, everybody. I recognize some names in the group, so it's lovely to be in a virtual space with you. I was going to say see you, but obviously most of our cameras are off. I'm just going to talk very briefly about why here, why in the library, because this does come up. And I think a lot of times in libraries, we find ourselves defending our expertise and our right to be in spaces that actually we should be invited into, or in fact, assumed to be in at the very least, really. And so one of the places we like starting when we discuss this, the reasons behind us delivering this credit-bearing module that's also an open educational resource, you know, it does a lot of things all at one time, is that the discussion around openness and open knowledge cuts across not only our institution, but our sector, and not only the sector, but internationally in so many different ways. And libraries are natural spaces for this discussion. We're a third space where knowledge is both sort of created, but also collected and also critically analyzed. We look interdisciplinarily at things. We understand the complexities of aligning or comparing or looking more broadly at really complex sector-wide situations. And at the same time, we can also speak really, really passionately about the elements of openness that sometimes aren't as often addressed when you house this kind of module perhaps inside a faculty or a more typical space. Because of our expertise in collections, because of the expertise we have around open research, because of things like at Manchester, we've just launched something called Flip to Open, which is an actual drive to change our teaching collections and push as many of them as possible to open education resources. Because of that kind of expertise and activity, we can actually seed and drive a sort of institution-wide conversations and also bring in a really wide variety of perspectives and feel very comfortable in that space. One thing that's been noted by external examiners who've looked at our module is the sort of breadth of complexity of the participants. We have people sign up from all over the institution, from all different kinds of roles, and they all feel really comfortable in what we deliver. And that's because that's what libraries are practiced at doing, isn't it? We're there for anyone who needs us. That's just sort of our habit. In addition to that, we think it's really important that libraries live the 5 Rs, which are sort of shorthand in open education for reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, retain. And especially in the what is being horrifically perhaps termed the era of generative AI, we think it's really important that we own that remixing, redistribution, and retaining in a place that can discuss things like citation and data management and copyright and intellectual property and information and all of that kind of thing. Because once those get divorced, right, from things like generative AI, which I'll go on to in a minute, we can attest you're living these 5 Rs because you're remixing. That's what the tools do. But you've missed out, obviously, on really key elements of that. And we can house those elements. We can promote them and we can defend them. In addition to that, we're quite flexible. It was very easy for us to do a lot of things that I think other teaching staff may have struggled to do in terms of creating the open publication and all this kind of thing. Quite frankly, because if we decided we wanted to do it and I got sign off, it was fine. So we didn't have to go through a big sort of a faculty set of really kind of bureaucratic processes to put things in place. It was okay to innovate. We're part of the PG Cert delivery team, so it all has to go through their stuff, but we were able to just be slightly ahead of the curve and slightly perhaps out of step with what would be typical because of where we're sitting. And then finally, we walk the walk. We're not going to open wash. We're not going to talk about open, as Chris said at the start, without actually allowing for open in all of its messiness that requires quite a bit of extra planning. And as I mentioned at the very start, one of the things that we think is really important around this is discussion around generative AI. really, really early on, Heather M. Ross wrote something about the soul of open being in danger. And she said, taking what isn't yours to create something new without giving credit, having permission, or considering the impact on others isn't innovation or acting in the spirit of open. At the least, it's theft. At the worst, it's colonization. And modules like ours in places like the library can have these discussions. They can, of course, occur anywhere. But when you're in a library and you're kind of you're just really buried in all of the different ways that we collect, criticize, build, and critically analyze the ways that we gather knowledge and understand it. It lends a different weight. It also allows for participants to step outside their faculty or other contextual perspective and kind of join in something very different. Sarah noted us asking them to use their non-dominant hand. If you think of coming into a third space as a very similar act, right? You become a learner because you've left the context where perhaps you might feel, remember, this is a module for staff, it's a postgraduate module, where you might feel that confidence that may lead you to a level of blindness. And then finally, we have this practical heuristic. So I'm going to leave this to Chris. This is one of the ways you might consider like thinking about this in your spaces. Chris.
So there's more detail on the blog. And I think really what this comes down to is the fact that we forced ourselves to be precise about exactly how we were going to be open and actually to look at the implications of that and the practicalities of that. So our approach is basically, first of all, decide the context in which you're considering using an open approach. Make a list of positive things which any open approaches might add, which could be desirable in that context. Then go back to that list and be really, really honest with yourself and ask yourself, which of those things genuinely require open approaches? So one example is, we were talking about the potential for participants writing a blog where they could see what each other had written and comment on it. Now, that doesn't strictly require an open approach. You can create a blog in a learning management system, but that blog, which is within a learning management system, has pros and cons. So pros are maybe they can be more candid, they can see the real names of their peers, they feel safer because it's not out there on the public internet. And a public blog, which is what we move towards, has other advantages, but there are pros and cons on each side. So cross out the benefits which don't genuinely require open approaches, or reword them to, we're going to consider participants writing a public blog. And the reason why we've chosen a public blog and not a private blog within a learning management system are these. Look at the costs, because openness is not just a switch that you can flick and have meaningful positive outcomes. There's a lot of extra time. We've had to create a lot of extra systems. The reason why we've done this is purely because we believe in it and because we think it's the most appropriate approach for this unit, not because we thought it was going to be easy. But talk to others who've done things. We've got all of our contact details on the blog post, and there's a lot more information about what we've done and how in there. And we're happy to talk to anyone who's considering this kind of approach or any vaguely similar approaches. We're always happy to get in touch or to put you in touch with others who we know in the sector. Yeah, so that's our heuristic. There's a bit more on it in the blog post. I think we have a nice quote next from Jennie.
We do. So we just wanted to finish up with something from Robin DeRosa, who's now in charge of the Open Educational Network and is very awesome. She goes by the name Actual Ham. So if you're looking for her online, that's what you should look for. But she's absolutely amazing. And she speaks really beautifully about our reliance on sort of everyday structures or perhaps typical structures and how we replicate those when we're trying to be open. And one of the things we'd like to push for in our library spaces and at places like ALN is that idea that actually we don't have to replicate what we're most familiar with. We need to use the principles we're holding that we value most to create what we know needs doing with the people and communities that we work with. So Robin says, engage learners in contributing to their learning materials so that knowledge becomes a community endeavor rather than a commodity that needs to be made accessible. To that end, let's stop fetishizing the textbook, which is at best a low bar pedagogical tool for transmitting information. OER is better than that. And we think open is better than that as well. There are opportunities there to be accessible and to be inclusive and to be creative and to create things collectively that just aren't present in other aspects and in other ways and approaching the creation of knowledge and discussion of it. So we've dropped these in the chat, but if you want more of them, they're also on the slides. And we also want to give a hat tip to 1HE Equity Unbound, which is where we get many of our things, and Liberating Structures, which we will love forever. And they've recently updated their web pages, so I don't have to say it looks like it's from the 90s anymore. And those are also available for you, and we can share it after. And then if you want any of our contact details, they're here. We have a communal address for the Open Knowledge and HE module. So if you drop something there, we all three see it. But if you want to get into contact with any of us directly, please do.